All right, guys, we are back with Mr. Lowell Larson. How you doing today, Lowell?
Terrific. Thank you.
Well, we had you on before. Brian, you remember that? That was way back in episode 53.
Yeah, barely. But I do remember it because it was such a cool product that he come up with. And
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
a
it's
long
like
time.
the perfect product for our podcast. You know, it's like literally the same niche. I mean, it's huge. So, Lowell, welcome back to the show. You were on episode 53. I'll have that link in the show notes if anybody wants to go back and listen to the Squirrel. I was actually camping in Marquette when you came to the campsite and visited me, and we recorded a show with you and your son. And
Yes.
well, welcome back. So let's hear a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and why we're chatting here today.
Well, I'm Lowell Larson. I'm from Marquette, Michigan. I'm a 78-year-old hunter, landowner, grandfather, father, of course, and I'm working to improve our woodlands for hunting and recreation for our future generations. And I'm doing that by my invention with the squirrel. I hope to plant. I have two separate properties that I've been planting acorns and chestnuts on, and so I know it's a long process, and when I use my age of 78, and I'm saying that I'm not going to be sitting under these trees, as the saying goes. So, but for the future generations, my grandkids and so on, I hope that I improve my land with a good mass product that will attract various animals: bear, deer, turkeys, grouse, blue jays, squirrels, all those animals eating on the acorns.
So now this area of the state, Michigan, you're in the Upper Peninsula. Are acorns one of the larger food sources in that area? I know beech nuts are big up there too. Or are you not seeing a lot of acorns in your area?
No, we have an pretty abundant crop of acorns. This year is a real bumper crop this year up here. They were really coming down yesterday. We had a little wind in. I mean, they were just pounding down. My wife and I went out and gathered up 2 5-gallon pails just in our yard alone. And I looked out there this morning and I could go and do it again, I think.
Wow, that's awesome. And I know you actually sell acorns on your website, but we're here to talk about the squirrel. Let's hear what you invented, when you invented it. Give us a quick story on that. I know we talked about it on 53, but you have a new product in your line of products. So let's hear about kind of where it started, how you got to it, and then we'll get into some more nitty-gritty stuff here shortly.
I had a forester come in and write a forestry plan for one of my properties, and he noted the lack of solid mass for animals such as acorns. And so he said, what you're interested in acorns or in hunting deer and so on, I would suggest that you plant some acorn in your forest and prepare some sites for it so that you'll have future use of the oak trees. Well, at that time, back in the 90s, that's 30 years ago, even back then, some people said, well, why are you planting acorns now? I'm not doing it for myself, but I'm doing it for the future. But those that I planted back in the 90s are now producing acorn, a nice acorn crop on my property. And it tends to hold a deer nearby at this time of the year. But I came across, the forester was asking me about planting, and I said, well, I have to come up with something that's going to work a little easier than getting on my hands and knees and planting acorns and trying to get them at the proper depth and so on. So I started working on this idea of the squirrel, and I developed this product so that it would plant the nuts in a standing, when I'm in a standing position, wouldn't have to stoop over. Planting at the proper depth. And one thing about planting acorns as opposed to seedlings, as you can plant a lot of acorns at a very reasonable cost. And the forester suggested that by planting from the nut, what it does is it sends down a taproot that secures the tree, where a lot of times you'll get what they call J rooting, where the taproot doesn't get down far enough. And then the tree is subject to blowover about the time they start producing acorns. So that's why I took off on this idea in the 90s, and I didn't do much with it until here back a few years ago. And my wife said, when are you going to do something about that tool? And it was sitting in the garage. So working with NMU, and I went over to what they call invest, where people would develop patents, and we put some students to work on it. We fine-tuned it, and we made our first squirrel. Well, then I went to Ohio on a meeting, the Paul Bunyan meeting in Ohio, and people that would stop at my booth were interested in this squirrel, but many requests were for chestnuts, which prompted me to make a larger squirrel that would accommodate a larger seed. So I went to the 1.5, which I developed this year, and we manufactured, and now they're starting to move. So that's a long story.
So Lowell, walk us through the differences. Last time we had you on, we went through the original version of the Squirrel. Kind of tell us the Cliff Notes version of that, what that has, and what the improvements were on the 1.5.
Well, the 125, the difference primarily is the 1.5 is a larger tubing system and cutting system, which adds about an extra pound to the weight, but it's gone from 1-inch diameter holes to 1.5 inch to accommodate the larger nuts. And but I find that the 1.5 would work just as well for the acorns as well, but the people that want to plant the larger nuts, the chestnuts and the larger nuts, would go to that 1.5. The acorns, okay. Yeah.
So the 1.5 can do the larger nuts and everything else the Squirrel could do.
Right.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So what else could you plant with the 1.5 besides the oaks that you originally started out with? What other kind of nuts are you running through the new one?
Okay, well, I had a gentleman that from down, I think it was North Carolina. He had planted oaks with my original squirrel, and he sent me an email the other day that he has now started using it for planting plum trees.
Wow.
Which surprised me. And I had one person ask me about the possibility of using it for pumpkin seeds. So I guess whatever you can put down the tube, it'll work.
Yeah. So walk us through that. How does that work with putting the seed into the tube?
Okay. As you walk along in the woods and you find a location you think that if you want to put in a tree, you simply give it a twisting action, pushing it into the ground. Or if the ground is real hard, there is a foot peg that you can put pressure on to help core out that soil. It cores out the hole, pulls it out of the ground. You move it over, you take your seed, drop it into the directional tube. It puts it into the hole. You take your tube back that you took the core out with and push the lever down, and it puts the soil sample on top of the nut. And then you simply firm it up with your foot and walk on. And you can go, you can plant depending on the soil conditions And the site preparation, you can put 100 to 300 in an hour. So you can't do that with seedlings. And I'm saying with the cost of acorns being so minimal, you can put in a lot of trees in a day.
Sure. So are you just doing the nuts, or in the case of trying to do pumpkins or plums, just doing one seed at a time, just dropping it down that tube?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Each core you pull out, you put a seed in there and cover it up with your core and firm it up with your foot and walk on. If the soil, if there's a lot of leaf litter on the ground, I'll kick it away and to get to the bare soil, and then I'll put my tube into the ground and extract the core.
No, Lowell, I thought that was pretty interesting that, guys are finding different ways to help you innovate, if you will, and planning different things. I know one of our buddies, Brad Thomas, he's out in Iowa. He's gonna consider using one for bald cypress trees.
Okay.
That's just another thing you can do with this. And I thought it was pretty interesting that you ended up, some of your service. I just urge these guys to give you a call and just talk to you, because you're similar to like a guy we had on a few times before, Charlie Morse, just one of these knowledgeable guys who is a pleasure to talk to. And I would just encourage people to call if they have any questions. But I liked how you followed up with your customer down in North Carolina like a year later, just to see how he's doing.
Yeah.
Have you talked to other customers of yours, and what are people doing with these Squirrel 1 and Squirrel 1.5? What's the normal use?
Well, they, what some people, if they don't have acorn or if they don't have oak trees growing on their property, they can prep a site by removing some trees. If they do a winter cut, I've encouraged landowners that if you plan on a winter cut and you want to start acorns on or oak trees on your land, plant it in the late fall prior to freeze up. The nut stays in stratification, which means it's dormant. And then after the cut in the winter, that nut is already in the ground. When that sun comes out in the spring, that nut will emerge, or that root will emerge from the acorn underground, and it's in competition with how quickly forests start growing back with a lot of smaller vegetation, but your acorn is in the ground and ready to go when that sun comes out in the spring and hits the ground.
Now, is that a natural stratification process then that you're doing by putting it in the fall and letting it sit there in the ground with the winter?
Well, see, now I mentioned earlier about gathering acorns yesterday. I'm going to float test them, and the ones that float will not grow. You throw those out. The ones that sink, you save. And then after I float test them to check for germination, whether they'll germinate or not, then I will sanitize them with a little household bleach in the water. This kills a lot of the ground spores and so on, so that you don't get mold growing in your, I put them in like baggies, and I put them in refrigeration, and then you won't get mold growing on your acorns if you use a little household bleach in water to sanitize it. And then, but you want to keep the acorns during stratification. You want to keep them damp. Don't let them dry out. Don't just set them in the corner in the garage. Keep them stratified by moisture on them. And then if you store them in about 34, 38 degrees, in the spring, you'll be set to go, because all of a sudden it seems like even when they're in refrigeration, they'll bust open and they will start sending out a sprout. And so that sprout, you want to get them in the ground fast, because those sprouts grow pretty fast, and the root, you don't want them to get too large or they won't go down the tube. You want to plant them early spring or late fall. And when you plant it late in the fall, prior to like a logging operation, that nut will stay stratified, just like in refrigeration underground, until such time that the sun warms the ground and causes the nut to break open and come out. But I really encourage people to put them in the fall. That's to me is the best time. And the second best time, of course, would be in the spring, early in the spring.
So are you suggesting that one should collect acorns now, if you will, and then stratify them in the fridge
Until
for a while, and then put them in the ground in the fall as well?
exactly. Put
Got
them,
it.
get them stratified, keep them damp so that husk stays, pliable. And then get them in the ground as soon as you can in the fall, after, just prior to the freeze up.
Okay, now you mentioned a couple of things about planting these before you have a timber company come in. I can see how that could be advantageous, right? You're not going to have the crew running over all your, seedlings from last year if you did it the year prior. The tops are going to help, protect the seedlings next year when they pop up from deer browse and animal browse. Is there any direction or location that one would want to consider when planting these? Are some soils better than others? Certain, sunlight areas, west facing or anything like that, or what's like your perfect condition to plant these in, if you're going to do it before a logging operation?
Before a logging operation, a lot of times I'll plant them even by the base of an existing tree, because the logging equipment doesn't go up, and run over, areas near a tree. And I like to, a lot of times because of the moisture, like little pockets, I'll put them in little pockets. I just put them in a whole variety of areas. But if you prep the site, and it's like any plant, it needs sunlight. So having a site prepared or a logging operation, burn over areas. I sold one to a gentleman out in California that this fire went through and completely decimated his forest. And he said he's got to start all over. So he ordered a planter and some acorns from me so he could start regenerating his forest.
Very nice. Very nice. Yeah, I think that's, when you're going through the motions of this, if you're putting in a 1-year-old tree or a certain oak tree and you have to dig a hole, protect it, all that good stuff, you're going for quantity here, which will improve your success rate overall. I think, if you have 100 trees instead of 10 trees, in 5 years, I think you're going to end up in a better situation. Now, is there any other sort of location that you want to be aware of in terms of soil? How about in a sandy soil area like we have a lot in Michigan? Is that a good thing? Do you like more of a lowland? What are you thinking of there?
No, I mean, it should be in a fairly well-drained soil, but and see, that's one of the reasons that taproot that I mentioned earlier is so important. That taproot drives way down into the ground. If you ever try to pull a little seedling out of an oak tree, you'll find out what a tug of war that will be, because that taproot, you might have 3 inches above ground, but underground it's 8-9 inches. And that taproot is very, very critical. And,
Interesting.
And so I think even in sandy soil, I've seen it growing very well. The big thing is deer browse. If you're in a heavy deer browse area, you're going to lose some. I was concerned when I first started planting back in the 90s, and I was getting deer browse on my oak trees, and the forester said, let it go. Another shoot will come up. And so sure enough, and you'll actually go by some areas where it looks bushy because it's been browsed off several times, and but the root is in the ground and it'll send up another shoot. That's what's nice about the oak. But like the forester told me, he said someday the deer will miss it, and he says there'll be such a root structure in the ground that it'll shoot up 3-4 feet in a year's time.
Yeah, no, we're familiar with that. We actually just had a gentleman on from Morse Nursery telling us the same thing. And they prefer that oak browse, that young growth, and you might have a bush after that or some good growth because the roots are all still there, right? So you're still shooting up that stalk the next year or after it's bit off, kind of with a vengeance.
And you can protect the area with, there's different products out, like tubes that you can put over. If you have like a dozen oak trees that you want to keep, you might want to consider putting protection over it to protect it from the deer, either a tube or putting up a fencing unit to keep the deer out. I've done that, and that works too. So it depends on how many oaks you want to do and how much you want to put into this too. But like I say, you put in a lot of oak trees, they're not going to get them all.
No, that sounds great. I think between that and the treetops from the logging operation, protecting them as well, you could have a pretty good stand going. And I like how you talked back about testing your acorns. Just an FYI for anybody out there, that's a very fun project to do with your little kids. I did it with my girls maybe 3 years ago, and I'll never forget it. It was a great time.
Yeah. No, it's well, like I said, I have two. You can buy these rollers that can pick up the acorns. You don't have to get on your hands and knees and pick them up. You can buy they're like a little basket, and you roll them over the acorns and you pick them up and you just separate and dump them into the 5-gallon pail, and it works slick. And like I said, my wife and I went out and we rolled up 10 gallons of acorns in probably an hour's time. And but the acorns were really heavy. There was a lot of acorns falling.
Yeah, is that one of those tools that some of the nut farmers use to pick up the harvest? Okay.
Yes.
Describe that a little bit better for the viewers, or the listeners, for what that looks like.
Well, it's a single handle. It has it looks like a wire basket on the bottom. I bought mine on, I think it was Amazon. I noticed I was out at Menards the other day, and they had several of them on an end cap. And when I'm out using it, it's amazing how many people will stop and say, "Where did you get that tool?" They have oak trees in their yards and they want to clean up. And yesterday when I was out picking up acorns with the roller, a woman stopped and I said, "What do you do with your acorns after?" And she says, I have a deer hunter that's right next to me and he takes them. I said, "Oh, she just wanted to clean up her yard and she was going to give her acorns to the deer hunter next door for feed." So I was hoping I could get her acorns, but anyway, they were spoken for.
Yeah, for sure. So are you having any customers, different areas of the country that are having higher success rates than others? Or are you seeing like an average success rate for when it comes to how many of these percentage wise you're going to get to survive?
I just planted a forestry company cut right up to one of my north line on one of my properties. And I went out in the skid trails. I had acorns last fall late, and I punched a bunch of them in the ground. And now I was just showing my son the other day. I said, "Look at all the red leaves. The leaves are turning red on these little oaks coming up." And some people, I had one gentleman that he tried it in the coal mining area, but the soil was so wet and boggy, he had a heck of a time, working with it. And that's another thing is when you plant it. One gentleman said, "Well, he's having problems planting," and I said, "Well, what has your weather been and conditions?" And he said, "Well, it's been very rainy," and he was saying it was so sticky, trying to drill the holes in the ground. And I said, "Well, wait a couple of days and try it." So I encourage the people to call me, talk to me about, if they do have an issue with it, but they're very few and far and in between. But I enjoy talking to the gentlemen, when they call, and it's interesting because I have a passion for this planting acorns.
Yeah. So do you get many calls with some success stories? Maybe some big projects, customers have had some really good success?
Yes, I think there's one on my website that they were planting, they had cut their 40 acres and they were reforesting it, he and his wife, and they took pictures of their dog. I don't know if my wife put that picture of the dog in the planter, and they were showing how they just went through and planted a big area, and like that gentleman that talked about the plum tree that talked or sent me an email yesterday. He said he's planted many and he's going to plant thousands more. So I don't know what he's planting, but he's excited about it. So I asked him if I could put it on my webpage, and he said certainly. So you might see that pop up on my webpage.
Yeah, Lowell, I think that one that you had up there, weren't they planting something like 10,000, 12,000, or like 20,000 acorns throughout that 40 acres or something like, there's some
Yes.
astronomical number.
Yes, I mean, they had gathered, I think they planted everything they picked up, and they had thousands of acorns planted. So people enjoy doing it. And it's not a strenuous thing. It's something that you can even have it. I was hoping to get, if I had more time to do it, get into the school force where kids could even go and plant trees. And it's a simple tool to use. And yet, and the kids wouldn't mind picking up acorns and planting them, with a little direction. And but most anyone can use it. It's something that I think is good for the environment and and wildlife as well.
So now I thought of a question there. You guys are picking up what, normally white oak or red oak, or what are you normally grabbing?
We normally up in the Upper Peninsula is basically red oak, and I know the deer prefer the white oak. And again, from what I understand, I haven't had much experience planting white oak, but they almost break out immediately when they hit the ground. You got to get those slowed down or get them in the ground that fall. But if you get them in refrigeration, get them in that stratification area, I think that would slow that process down and you'll be able to plant the white oaks in the late fall. But you can't, you just can't leave them there and go digging around in the leaves looking for them. But as soon as they fall, get them picked up. And that's why I said yesterday was fantastic when the wind was blowing and they were coming down like rain. So that was my signal to get out there and start gathering them.
No, that makes perfect sense. So you're saying that the white oak tend to sprout quicker, so you could actually maybe have them sprout too soon in the fall?
Yes, get them. I would get them from few people I've talked to about white oak. They said that they come down, it doesn't take long, a couple rains or something, and they start splitting. So I would get them picked up. I'd watch closely and grab those and get them in the refrigeration, and clean them up. And if you're going to put them in refrigeration, I think that sanitizing is important because you want to keep them damp. But then if there's any bacteria or ground spores, and then I never mentioned this, but somebody asked me one time, well, why are they floating, the acorns? When I float test them, there's a weevil that gets in them. Now it's a white weevil with a black head. And I was talking to one guy, he uses those acorns, he keeps them because he gets that weevil out and he uses them for pan fishing. So I've never done that, but I mean, gentleman was telling me about it, but he said that little white worm with that black head, he said on a hook is great for pan fishing. So
Yeah,
there's
it sounds like a spike to me. Yeah, it sounds like a little spike, little larva. I think that takes some patience to go crack open every acorn that's a dud and pull the worm out of it.
Yeah. But
now, back on the acorn subject, have you ever tried like swamp white oak acorns? Maybe some of the hybrid acorns that like Morse would sell, anything like that? Have you gotten a little crazy and tried anything like that, or just because you're in the UP, you stick to what works with the red oaks?
Well, and there's I I haven't had any experience with swamp oak, and I mean there's I think 94 different types of oak trees around the world, but I haven't had any experience with it, and I don't know the growing zone of which they will grow in. Where I think we're in zone 4, and so it depends on the zone and where they are. I'd like to, like I said, I wish we had more white oak up here, but it's a little bit far north for white oak. I know the deer prefer them, but
Yeah, I think you could really go wild with this. I mean, anything that's smaller than 1.5 inches in diameter, you could plant with this.
right.
So I think that your new version is huge. I know that I'm gonna be starting a new project on some acreage in northern Michigan. So I'm gonna be considering a diversity of nuts to be planting here and see what I can figure out. Now, are there any areas where competition might hurt, or like say you're in a clear cut, like an aspen planting? Would you think there'd be too much competition with that aspen regeneration, or would the oaks just live through it as the aspen gets older and they'll take over eventually?
Well, aspen, as you know, is a very fast growing tree. Oak trees don't grow as quickly as aspen. Aspen, my gosh, they'll put a couple feet on in a year. And but if you prep the site, there's different ways of prepping the site. If you're cut over an aspen area, you can treat it with herbicide and knock the aspen down when it's young, and then go in and plant. But aspen, that's a bad one to get oaks growing in. I would have a lot of difficulty with that, I think. But I think if you treat them with herbicide, that would be one way to try it anyway. And I know aspen is good for grouse and so on, but and it's good to have a diverse forest that would attract different animals.
Yeah, I think made me think about that. Northern Michigan, they clear cut a lot, as you're familiar with, and I know that it seems the aspen regen is what I see the majority of the time, but they're still leaving oaks out there to seed into the aspen, seed trees, if you will. So I'm wondering, eventually, I think it's got to turn from aspen into an oak forest, because I don't think they're treating every clear cut with herbicide up there. But I don't know. I'll have to ask somebody in that neck of the woods, I guess.
Yeah, no, I like I said, I think it'd be tough, working with aspen, but I think that if you're determined enough, and depending on how big of an area you want, you don't have to do hundreds of acres of oak. If you do some, get some good trees producing, and even if you take and cage them up or tube them, to protect them. Depends on how much work you want to put into it.
Yeah, you bring up a good point there too. Instead of making a big giant 30 acre, 20 acre, whatever size you work your butt off, the smaller clumps make it easier to pattern the deer once you have those little clumps that are dropping and the deer aren't just feeding everywhere.
Right. You can turn a ridge in the woods into an oak if if you, like I said, if you plant it. I'm such a strong believer in getting those seeds in the ground prior to a logging operation. If I planted, what happened on one of the plants I did, the company was going to come in and cut part of my property. So my grandson and I went out, we planted 500 acorns in this one, it was soft maple. And I thought, well, they'll cut it this winter. Next spring, the oaks will be in the ground, ready to go. Well, we got snowed out. We got heavy snow and the logger didn't get in there. But yet the oaks came up. And so I went through and I tied a little um, orange ribbon just to show different people that, you know, it does work under story, planting them in advance. And, you know, I wouldn't be at all surprised. I would have pretty good regeneration anyway, even after a year or two, even though it's little whips, even if they got run over by one of the logging equipment, you know, they spring up and the root is in the ground if it does get broken off. They'll send up another shoot. But I haven't been able to get that section cut yet, but one of these days we'll cut it.
Yeah, I've seen that happen myself. If I've cut new trails through the woods, sometimes the tractor will just push the oak over while I'm mowing and not cut the stem, and that thing will just keep springing back up until you actually sever it. They're
Right.
pretty difficult to kill for sure.
Right.
Yeah. So you mentioned this not being a super strenuous endeavor here with this tool that you're created. Walk us through the design that you came up with and how you made it easy on people's backs and the other features that you thought of for that.
Well, I went over to invent NMU with my prototype that I had originally made. And so they, as part of involving the students at Northern Michigan University, they allowed the students to pick it apart, work on ergonomics as far as, okay, we're all different heights and so on. So they came up with an ideal height for most people. You know, we can't make it adjustable for everybody, but we worked through the ergonomics of it. And then we considered other materials like different types of plastics to make it instead of steel. We made this out of this is all steel product, and it weighs approximately 7 pounds. But we thought about how would this enter into if you're planting all day, the fatigue of carrying a 7-pound tool around with you all day. But you know, I think it's I like the steel part of it because it is pretty indestructible. They worked on that. One forester said, well, you could put a GPS tracking system on it where you could locate every tree you plant in the woods. I said, come on, guys, we gotta keep this cost down. I mean, you know, and they were talking about multiple feeding automatically the acorns into it. I said, you're adding weight to it. We talked about all these things. Before we came up with the final design, I sat around a table with 5 different foresters. And we put the thing on the table and said, okay, pick it apart. What are we going to do? How do we change it? How do we make it better? How do we make it more user-friendly? And that's how we went about it. And different foresters had all different ideas. Like I said, they were doing GPS tracking systems on it. And I said, oh, man. I mean, I would have a multi-million-dollar project here if I kept up with them.
Sure.
But,
yeah.
But it was interesting. I enjoyed the whole process, you know. But and they tried different heights and how much pressure and whether it should be sharpen the edge of it. And there were so many things they went through. And then I picked the color. I said, I want hunter orange. And they said, well, why do you want hunter orange for the squirrel? I said, because if you put it down somewhere in the woods, you can find it. And so anyway, that's where it got its color from. But
Absolutely.
we even talked about color. I mean, should it be white? Should it be orange? Should it, you know, we debated all of these things.
Right.
And then the patenting process on it was just unbelievable. I received that 2 months ago, the final patent number. It was patent pending, but the patent people out in Washington, they just kept going over it all around the world trying to find if I was infringing on somebody else, but they finally issued me my patent number. So, so I have my US patent.
Well, your next stage after you get done doing all this with the squirrel, you could go into making videos on how to develop products. That's quite a process you went through. And how long did that take?
Well, that, when we were over at Northern, it took us over a year of invent NMU. They tried different sizes, different materials. They tried different, like I said, they tried plastic. They tried different things to see what would be most cost effective. And we ended up with this design. They actually welded them up. The students at the training center, they welded up the prototypes and they kept evaluating what they were doing. And it was an interesting process, but I'm glad I went through it. It takes time, but you know, it worked out well, I thought.
Well, congratulations on getting your own patent. That's always been a pretty awesome achievement. I'd love to have my own someday. That's amazing. And I think back to your thing about the GPS. I mean, a lot of these hunting apps these days, Onyx or whatever you want to use, they have a tracking feature where you can track through the woods. You know, you're
Right.
tracking a deer, your trail. If you turn that on while you're, you know, running and throwing acorns in the ground, you can see, okay, well, I got this 2-acre spot done over here.
Right.
I got
Right.
this 3-acre spot done over here, or 1/2 acre here. So just keep
Yeah,
that in mind. It's kind of a tip if anybody ends up trying out. I know that's what I'm gonna try to do to keep my story straight. But you could do an oak grove over here, a chestnut grove over here, and then you have it all mapped out, you know, to the
Right.
point. Exactly.
But I wasn't going to start putting that onto my acorn planter, you know.
No, I don't blame you. I don't blame you. I want to have you pull up that one of your planners. I see it there behind you. Let's just spend a quick minute and grab that. I know the listeners are going to have to go over to YouTube to see this. But there'll be a link below and we got your video on our website, but there it is.
That's the 1.2 or 1.
That's a 1.5. That's bigger than the one I saw. Yep.
And
All powder coated.
what's that?
Is it all powder coated?
Yes, it's all powder coated and rubber grips on the top, plastic handle that you push down to depress the core back into the ground,
Awesome.
and then you step it down. And
Impressive.
but you drop the acorn down or your nut down into this hole, and that long tube directs your nut down into the hole. And this one, of course, cuts your core out. You can
Awesome.
see that.
Yeah, I can see it all.
There's a little difference in size. They're basically the same. But this one here is the 1.5 is about a pound heavier than the normal squirrel.
Sure. Now, you have these on your website at nutplanter.com for anybody who's interested. There'll be a link below as well, as I always say. What are these retailing at?
They retail at $149.95,
Awesome.
and then plus shipping and handling. But I even sold one over in Denmark. I think I told you that. Jared. But that was a treat too. I mean, that was an experience that I went through as far as getting through customs. That had to go to Chicago. It was taken to Chicago. Customs had to approve it, you know, and then I had to fill out all the custom forms, and it was half the cost of the acorn planter to send it. So because I wanted one over in Denmark, I helped the guy out with shipping, but only that one time. I just wanted to get one over there. It was interesting that it went to Denmark, but I helped them a little bit on the shipping cost.
It's good marketing.
So, what's that?
That's good marketing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just a testament of what kind of guy you are. And like I said earlier, I urge people then what you said, give Lowell a call, talk tree planting with him. I mean, this guy obviously loves it. You know,
I love to talk tree planting.
Yeah. I mean,
I encourage all my people to call me, and you know, if they ever have any questions. And I surprised one the other day. I sent him an email, asked him how things were going with it. He was shocked that I followed up with him. And but it was interesting. But I still believe in that customer service. I'm at that age, you know, where I believe in talking to the people, and so. But yeah, but I'm willing to help some people out if they want, if they're interested in this. This, by the way, for the landowners and their wives and husbands and so on that want to give one as a gift. This is a good Christmas gift. This time of the year, they got to start thinking about it. And if they like the, you know, that hard to buy person that they, now, wouldn't you like an acorn planter under your tree?
I would for sure.
I would. Yeah, I know it's going on my list if I don't buy one ahead of that. I think and that kind of leads right into how we're gonna wrap this up here. You have a special discount for Habitat podcast listeners. Is that right?
I do. I will take 10% off until Christmas 2021. If they're interested, I'll help them out with their Merry Christmas.
All right. Well, that's very gracious of you guys. You heard it here. Grab it before Christmas, because after that, it's gone. I know that Lowell, your web, so they can call you and talk to you and order, which is probably the preferred way because you learn a bunch. Two, right. They can email you and say that they heard you on the podcast to get the discount that way. Or if right. they buy online, they can put a note in the instructions or the notes online on your website. How does that work?
Well, they could put it, there's a place for mailing instructions, or just put a note somewhere on the order that you had heard it on podcast, and I'll give them their discount. Or if they want to call me, I think my phone number is there also. But they can get a hold of me on the web at nutplanter.com, or my mailing address is nutplanter@gmail.com.
The original, not Nut Planter 2 or 3, just Nut Planter.
Right.
So, Lowell, this has been an awesome chat. I don't think I was asking this question yet when we had you on. So humor me here. I might already know the answer, but what is your favorite tree?
My favorite tree? Well, it has to be oak. And you know, I taught school for 30 years, and I was a wood shop teacher. Would you believe that? And but I like walnut to work with. I like walnut. I like oak. I like my hardwoods. My camp on one of my properties, I have it's all done in black ash paneling. It's considered poor man's oak, and I use that to put on the walls and the ceiling of my camp. And then my other camp, I have a log interior, and I used aspen of all things. You know, we talked about aspen. I used aspen paneling in reverse, and I put it on horizontally in the bedroom areas. And it's a white with dark brown, or with a brown color in it. Really looks good.
Wow, I'd love to see a picture of that aspen paneling sometime. You should email me one over. That's awesome.
You'd love it. If you come to the UP sometime, I'll have to take you down there, because when you close the door, I made all the doors, I made all the cabinets, and the one side of the door is aspen, and the other side of the door, when you close it, is pine, depending on which side of the room you're on. So,
wow.
Anyway. Well, later.
That's awesome, Lowell. I just want to thank you for your time today. You know, you got a bunch of great information here. We're going to keep, working with you, and hopefully we get some of these tree planters, these nut planters, these squirrels out to the masses here. I know, like I said, if you're planting a bunch of trees, a bunch of acorns, this thing will save you time. Lowell planted like 4 of them in front of me within like 10 seconds at that campsite. So I've seen it work. It works. Cool invention, Lowell. I'm proud of you. That's awesome.
Okay. Thanks, Jared. Nice talking with you.
Thanks, Lowell.